I've spent over 5,000 hours in therapy rooms, not just as a psychologist treating clients, but as a client myself. I've sat in both chairs, and what I learned from that dual perspective completely changed how I understand healing. You see, when you're trained as a psychologist, you're taught protocols. There's evidence-based treatments, step-by-step interventions, and so on. But when you're the one sitting across from the therapist, dysregulated, struggling, barely holding it together, you realize something. Protocol isn't enough, and it's not what really heals you. It's the relationship. And there's neuroscience to explain why. If you're a high performer, a founder, an entrepreneur, an executive, or an athlete, and you've done therapy but you felt like something was still missing, this one is for you. When I was training to become a psychologist, I was taught that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the gold standard, evidence-based, research-backed, effective, and it is for certain presentations. But here's what they don't actually emphasize enough. CBT is a top-down approach. It assumes that your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's online and accessible for you. It also assumes that you can catch your thoughts, challenge them, and choose different ones. But here's the problem. When you're traumatized or you're in a trauma response, your thinking brain goes offline. And when the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, detects danger, it hijacks the nervous system and your prefrontal cortex shuts down, your body floods with stress hormones, and now you're in fight, flight, or freeze. And in that state, you literally cannot access rational thought. So when a therapist hands you a thought record and says, challenge your distorted thinking, your brain can't do it, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because the part of your brain that does that is offline. This is what Bessel van der Kolk means when he says the body keeps the score. Trauma isn't stored in your thoughts, it's stored in your nervous system, in your body, in your implicit memory. And you can't think your way out of an implicit memory. You have to work from the bottom up, body, nervous system, emotions, thoughts, not the other way around. Before I became a psychologist, I was a client. I started therapy around my mid-20s for complex PTSD. And I did what I was told. I filled out thought records, I challenged my cognitive distortions, but here's what happened. It actually made me feel more broken because I couldn't do it. My thoughts were moving too fast, my body was too activated, my nervous system was screaming danger, and I thought it was my fault. But now I understand what was actually happening. My trauma wasn't about faulty thinking. It was about a dysregulated nervous system and a faulty sense of safety. Gabor Mate says that trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you in the absence of an empathetic witness. I grew up in a home where my emotions weren't safe, where I had to perform to earn love, and where my worth was absolutely conditional. So I learned to disconnect from my feelings and to live in my head, to control everything, because feeling was dangerous. And CBT, with all its focus on thoughts, kept me exactly where I'd always been, in my head, trying to control my way to safety. Then I found a therapist who worked differently. One session I came in, I was completely dysregulated, on the edge of panic, and instead of redirecting me to a technique, she just sat with me, calm, grounded, and present. She didn't try to fix me, she just let me feel. And here's what happened neurobiologically. Her regulated nervous system co-regulated mine. Her calm activated my ventral vagal system, the part of my nervous system responsible for safety and connection. My body said, I'm safe, I can let go. And slowly my nervous system came back online. Not because I thought differently, but because my body felt safe. This is polyvagal theory, it's neuroscience. Healing doesn't happen through protocols only, it happens through co-regulation. Fast forward, I'm now a practicing psychologist and have been for a little while, and here's what I started noticing with my clients, especially the high performers. They didn't need more tools, they needed to feel safe enough to let go of control. Now, not every high performer is running from trauma. Some people are just wired to build. They love the challenge, they rest well, they're super ambitious without being tortured. But if you're watching this and if you can't stop, if rest feels like failure and if your worth is completely attached to your output, if you're high performing on the outside and you're falling apart on the inside, that's usually a wound beneath it. Let me explain what I mean. High performers who burn out are often people who learned early that love was conditional, that they had to achieve to be worthy, that their feelings were too much. So they did what made sense. They performed. They became successful, driven, relentless, and that strategy has a cost. Because when achievement becomes your survival, you can't stop, you can't rest, you can't feel, you can't let your guard down. Your nervous system stays in a chronic state of activation, always scanning for the next threat or the failure or the next thing that you've got to fix. And eventually your body breaks down. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system is exhausted from decades of hypervigilance. I worked with a founder, let's call him Alex, who came to our program in acute crisis, severe anxiety, panic attacks. He was self-medicating with alcohol and Xanax for years. He'd been in therapy. He had some coping strategies, breathing, grounding, and so on. But he couldn't use them because his prefrontal cortex was offline. His amygdala was running the show. His body was in survival 24/7. So we didn't start with cognitive work. We started with bottom-up regulation. We did neurofeedback to retrain his brainwaves. We used somatic therapy to release the trauma stored in his body. We used EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing to reprocess the implicit memory his mind couldn't let go of. And what happened was that his nervous system started to calm down. And as we worked from the body up, something shifted. The breathing exercises suddenly started to work. The coping skills made sense because his brain could finally access them. CBT isn't the problem. The problem is trying to use it when the prerequisite, which is a nervous system that's somewhat safe, isn't there. Here's what I need you to understand. The mental health system wasn't designed to heal you. It was designed to make you functional enough to keep producing. Think about it. Traditional therapy is 50 minutes a week, maybe an hour. You talk about your problems, you get a coping skill, you get back to your life. And the system calls that success because you can get back to work. But what if work is part of the problem? What if your achievement is your coping? What if you've been running from your feelings your entire life and then therapy just gives you a better way to keep running? That's not healing, that's just management. Gabor Mate says that we've confused normal with healthy. What if the relentless productivity, the constant achievement, the inability to rest, what if all of that is your trauma response? High performers don't just randomly burn out. You burn out because you learned that your worth is tied to your output, that love is conditional, that you're only valuable when you're achieving, and no amount of cognitive reframe will change that. Because it's not a thought problem, it's a nervous system problem. And this is why traditional therapy often fails high performers, because it focuses on symptoms, on coping, on getting you back to functional. What you actually need is to heal the wound that made you feel like you have to perform to be worthy. And that requires bottom-up work too. Body-based therapy, somatic releases, nervous system regulation. It requires relational safety. Co-regulation with someone who can hold space for you so that your nervous system can finally calm down. And it requires integration, not one modality in isolation, all working together. Medical, psychological, somatic, energetic, nutritional, not over years, scattered all at once, because trauma didn't fragment you one piece at a time. And you can't really heal one piece at a time either. I worked with another client, let's call her Maya, who came to us already stable. She'd done years of therapy. She understood her patterns and she had some tools. But she said to me something that really stuck with me. I'm managing, but I'm not free. And what we discovered was this. She'd been taught to cope, but she'd never really been taught to heal. Coping is what you do when you survive. It's white knuckling your way through it. Healing is what happens when you feel safe enough to stop controlling. And that happens through relational safety. Not just with a protocol, with a person who can hold space for you and what you've been carrying alone. And this is almost the difference between what we see in AI therapy and human therapy. AI cannot co-regulate with you or hold space for what's happening in your nervous system and in your body. So if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I get it, but what do I actually do? Let me be clear about something. You don't need to stop achieving. I'm not here to tell you slow down, lower your standards, be less ambitious. Absolutely not. High performers like you're built to create, to build, to push. I get it. I'm one too. And there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the difference. Healthy ambition is self-expression. You build because you're actually called to, because you have something in you that just needs to be created. And if you take a week off, you're still you. Trauma-driven ambition is self-preservation. You build because stopping feels like death, because your worth is measured on output, and rest actually feels dangerous. One comes from fullness and the other one comes from fear, and that's the difference. The body knows the difference, even if the mind doesn't. Real healing doesn't mean giving up on what makes you who you are. It means you get to keep building, but from a place where your worth isn't on the line every single day, where you can achieve without destroying yourself in the process, where you're ambitious because you want to be, not because you're terrified of what's going to happen if you stop. And if you're in therapy right now and it's not working, I want you to ask yourself something. Is my therapist helping me understand why I'm wired this way? Or am I just being handed out breathing exercises and hoping for the best? Because if you don't get to the root of it, the wound beneath all the achievement, you'll just keep running. And eventually your body will make you stop. If you're someone who's been in therapy for years, if you've been feeling stuck, and if you learned all the skills but you can't access them when it matters most, if you're a high performer on the outside, exhausted on the inside, you are not broken. And you're not doing it wrong. The system just wasn't designed for you. I know this because I've lived both sides. I spent years thinking I was the problem because therapy wasn't working. But it wasn't me, it was the approach. And now as a psychologist, I get to offer what I wish I had. A space where healing doesn't happen through compliance with just a protocol, but through relationships, through integration, through being fully seen, held, and safe. If you're realizing you need more than management, if you're ready to actually heal the wound beneath the achievement, let's talk. DM me on Instagram. I only work with one client at a time. And if you're ready to do the deep integrative work, now is the time. Thank you for being here. I'd love to hear your story.